We need a new system. We need a new society. We need to demand that which may have sounded impossible even a few weeks ago, but is not only realizable, but an imperative necessity. Donald Trump is filling key cabinet positions. He's announced his selection for Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, for the CIA, for the U.S. Ambassador to the UN, and other positions. Today we're going to talk about what to expect from the next Trump White House. Welcome to the Socialist Program. I'm your host, Brian Becker. Today we're talking with Walter Smolarek. Walter is the editor of liberationnews.org. Walter, welcome back.
Thanks very much for having me on the show.
Big picture, Walter, how would you characterize the Trump White House? Of course, it's not a Trump White House yet. It's still the Biden White House. Biden, by the way, met with Trump earlier today. Very cordial meeting. Unlike when Trump was leaving and refused to have anything to do with the incoming Biden administration, there's Biden and Trump, Biden saying, yeah, we want you to succeed, just like Obama said to Trump in 2017, we want you to succeed. Very interesting, because just weeks ago, the Democrats were saying if Trump is elected, this is an ultimate threat to democracy itself. But when you look at the cabinet picks, Walter, one cannot but come to the conclusion that this is a very far-right government coming into shape. Perhaps the furthest right government in 100 years, and that would be after the labor movement of the 1930s and the great civil rights revolution of the 1950s and 60s, the women's movement, the LGBTQ movement, the disabled movement. Anyway, there's a lot at stake right now. How would you characterize the new Trump White House?
Yeah, it's really remarkable what's going on. I mean, I think this is absolutely a far-right government. It's a government of, by, and for the billionaires. It's dedicated to shredding the most basic rights that people enjoy that date back, like you're saying, to the 1930s, the New Deal, the 1950s and 60s, the Civil Rights Revolution that overthrew Jim Crow apartheid in the United States. That's really what they want to shred. That's what Trump and the team that Trump is assembling wants to carry out. On the domestic front, that means a vicious war on immigrants, mass deportations, potentially rounding up millions of people, shredding the rights won by the Black civil rights movement, affirmative action, of course, already on the chopping block, but so many other racist anti-Black policies that the Trump administration has in store. When it comes to the labor movement, I mean, an absolute war on organized labor, especially public sector workers, with this Department of Government Efficiency that he's talking about, cuts to social programs. And then when you look at the international arena, he's assembling a team of the most extreme warmongers you can think of. Trump sold himself as a pro-peace candidate, but when you look at these appointments, like you're saying, state, defense, head of the CIA. I mean, these are all hardcore warmongers who are actually going to take us closer and closer and closer to World War III, not averted like Trump is promising. So yes, this is an extreme far-right government, and it's a government committed to the interests of Wall Street and corporate CEOs.
Well, I want to take a look at who's who in the incoming Trump cabinet and the Trump government. Some of them have to be confirmed, of course, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. But let's start first with the immigration issue. Tom Homan has been selected to be the so-called border czar. Anyway, he was the head of ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I want to play a clip from him. It's him talking about what he intends to do if Trump is in fact elected. This was a little while ago. It says a lot about who he is and what Trump intends. Let's listen.
Hey, look, they gave me 5 minutes to say a few things, so if I offend anybody tonight, I don't give a shit. How many pounds of fentanyl didn't make in this country to kill Americans? How many known suspected terrorists didn't make it in the country? How many billions of dollars did the cartels make? President Trump is one badass president. He secured the border at a level we've never seen before. And I got a message to the millions of illegal aliens that's been released into the United States under this administration. Don't get too comfortable. We're going to need some help. Do I have any volunteers that want to come back and help run the biggest deportation operation in the history of this nation? In January, of 25, the greatest president of my lifetime, walking back in the White House. He tells me, we got, I say 120 days. He says, no, you got 60 to lock the border down. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what I told the president. He comes back, I come back, we fix this shit.
Unusual sort of tone and tenor and language for a high government official. The whiff of fascism against immigrant families, it's more than a whiff. It's a very strong odor, Walter.
It's completely, outrageous, disgusting, over the top. I mean, Trump is installing the most ideologically racist, anti-immigrant figures to lead all of these key posts. So, the borders are Tom Homan. Clearly, I think, fascistic is not overstating it. I mean, just listen to what he said there. It's also important to note, I think, that Tom Homan was awarded under the Obama administration. He was given something called the Presidential Rank Award because at that time he was a lower ranking official in ICE, although still significant. And Obama thought he did a really great job deporting lots and lots of undocumented people. And so he gave him the Presidential Rank Award for that. Well, clearly now he's a firm political supporter of Trump and the far right. And that's who Trump is.
But doesn't that say so much about the Democrats when you think about it? The immigrant rights movement, the DACA movement, the movement of young immigrants who had come here as babies, basically, and still, even when they were 20, some of them were 30 years old, still without papers, they couldn't go to college. Obama finally, under pressure from that mass movement, the Dreamers movement, had an executive order to give legal status, temporary legal status to the Dreamers. That's called DACA. The immigrant rights movement at that time called Obama the deporter-in-chief because more people had been deported under Obama than any president ever in the history of the United States. And, it's Obama coddling this guy. It's not about Obama the person. The Democratic Party coddles these right-wing thugs, and they don't turn around and say, thank you very much. They were like, yeah, let's keep going. Let's keep doing it. Anyway, go ahead.
Sure, and Homan was specifically responsible for that mass deportation effort under Obama. His position in ICE was the head of enforcement and removal operations. And I was actually just looking at the press release announcing the award that Obama gave Homan, and it's all these statistics about how he's done a great job carrying out huge numbers of deportations as the head of enforcement and removal operations. So there's a clear through line here. Biden also deported huge numbers of people, essentially adopted Trump's quote-unquote remain in Mexico policy, which violates all sorts of human rights and international law. So yes, I think there's a consensus among both wings of the ruling class, of the political elite, that they're going to unleash a war on immigrants. And maybe there's rhetorical differences. Stephen Miller is talking about sending the National Guard in and setting up massive prison camps in the desert in Texas to house, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are, detained in these huge military-style raids that he has planned. So this is certainly an escalation, but it's consistent with the rising tide of anti-immigrant repression that has been going on under both Republican and Democratic administrations.
Right now, because Harris lost both the popular vote and the Electoral College. Last week we were saying she had lost by 6 million. As more and more votes come in, Walter, it's narrowing. Trump still wins, but it's by around 3 million. About the same number Hillary Clinton beat Trump by in 2016, even though she lost the Electoral College. She won by about 3 million popular votes. Now Trump has reversed that. He beat Harris by around 3 million votes. But even though, it's getting closer, there's a lot of hand-wringing going on by the Democrats. Why did we lose? How could this happen? How could Trump, who was considered such a disgrace 4 years ago after January 6th, who is a 4-time convicted felon, et cetera, how could we lose to him? And, a lot of people are saying, I saw James Carville and these other people saying, it's because we've embraced woke politics. And there's this whole group of Democratic politicians say we have to stop being so woke. They didn't run a so-called woke liberal campaign, Walter. They ran a right-wing campaign. And I'm not defending all the woke sort of language and all that, but they didn't run a left-wing liberal campaign. Kamala Harris really ran as a Reagan Democrat, and in some ways on the issue of immigration, a little bit to the right of Reagan. Reagan amnestied 3 million people in 1986, the last time, undocumented people, the last time there was comprehensive immigration reform. We have some clips of how the Democratic Party ads during the 2024 election, which gives lie to the idea that they ran a liberal campaign. I want to play this clip real quick, and then I want to get your comments.
Melissa Slotkin, securing our border.
Sherrod Brown is working to fix our border crisis.
I put away a slew of cartel drug lords, the Mexican mafia, violent criminals.
Kamala Harris has spent decades fighting violent crime. As a border state prosecutor, she took on drug cartels and jailed gang members for smuggling weapons and drugs across the border. As vice president, she backed the toughest border control bill in decades. And as president, she will hire thousands more border agents.
When it comes to the border, Ted Cruz is all hat, no cattle.
Calling all red is tough.
I mean, Walter, that sounded like the way Trump sounded in 2016, not even the way Ronald Reagan sounded in 1986. Most immigrants and most immigrant workers, immigrant students, immigrant families, they aren't the recent arrivals. They've been here for a long time. They're integrated into all of our communities. They are an essential part of the workforce. There's 15 million people at least who are undocumented. The Democrats sounded like our Trump Republicans there.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, that is exactly what Trump's rhetoric was in the 2016 campaign. And it's not that different from what his rhetoric is now, even though that's gotten more extreme too. I mean, the Democratic Party is incapable of putting forward a true alternative narrative about immigration, immigrant rights, because they're not willing to talk about the reasons that cause people to leave their country in the first place. I mean, that's not something that anybody would do lightly. It's not a decision that anybody would take lightly. Why are people leaving their country? Well, typically it's because of either the poverty created by the dominance of U.S. corporations or the violence and destabilization caused by the policies of the U.S. government. Take Venezuela, for instance, one of the most demonized group of, like you're saying, newer arrived immigrants that Trump has really zeroed in on, and the Democrats have really zeroed in on as well, trying to scapegoat them for crime, etc. Well, Venezuela has been completely sanctioned by the U.S. government, and it's really started under the Obama administration, but then Trump imposed sanctions, destroying the country's oil industry, just dozens and dozens and dozens of sanctions imposed on Venezuela that created a profound economic crisis that caused several million people to have to leave their homes, to leave Venezuela, go elsewhere, including the United States, because of the efforts of the U.S. government to destroy the Venezuelan economy and therefore overthrow the independent government there. Haiti, a similar thing. I mean, there's been so many U.S. invasions and occupations of Haiti, or U.S.-sponsored or organized invasions of occupations in Haiti. And of course, the country is going through extreme destabilization as a result. And so people have to leave to find a safe place to live and work. I mean, that's what's really happening. And working people here in the United States have so much more in common with working people in other parts of the world who are just trying to do exactly what U.S.-born workers would do, right? Try to provide a decent standard of living for their family where they're safe. And that means coming to the United States in many cases. So that basic message of working class solidarity and anti-imperialism is one that the Democratic Party absolutely is incapable and refuses to articulate.
The Statue of Liberty in the harbor here in New York is inscribed with the words, give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. This is the land of immigrants, et cetera, et cetera. This is such a dominant theme of who America said it was. I mean, it was largely a mythology. The Immigration and Nationality Act that was passed in 1965, at the same time the Civil Rights Act was passed and the Voting Rights Act, that allowed Asian people to emigrate to the United States, to come to the United States. There was for 70, 80 years, a racist anti-Asian immigration policy, and not just against Asians. I mean, it was an immigration policy that said, give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, as long as they're white people, basically. And that's what's going on today. This campaign against immigrants is really fundamentally racist. It's fundamentally racist. Yes, there's an element of xenophobia. You know, there's always the ability to scapegoat and blame the other, to blame outsiders for whatever the problems are inside of a country. But there's an unmistakable racist character of this campaign. Anyway, we have to stand with our immigrant sisters and brothers, immigrant families. We've had big protests have already started. There was a meeting here in New York City on Friday night at the People's Forum. It was called What Is to Be Done? We heard from immigrant representatives of immigrant organizations. They're setting up defense committees around the country so that native-born, non-undocumented people and undocumented people and immigrants with legal status, meaning everybody from the working class, can stand together to shield and protect immigrants, because Trump is saying this is going to be the largest mass deportation in U.S. history. Now, there have been other mass deportations, so-called Operation Wetback, that was its actual name, in the 1950s, actually was one of the biggest deportations. I mean, millions of people were rounded up, including a lot of U.S. citizens, if they happened to be Mexican-American, Chicano. They were deported. A lot of U.S. citizens were deported during that time. But Trump is saying, and Tom Homan, who we heard from, this is going to be the largest mass deportation ever. This is a racist lynch mob type atmosphere that's being created against immigrants.
It absolutely is. Yeah. And I mean, I think that part of this scapegoating effort is to say, well, you know, the immigrants and undocumented people in particular are responsible for all of the problems in society, like inflation. That was a huge part of Trump's message, like rent. So many people are having trouble making ends meet when it comes to housing. And basically Trump is saying, well, you know, the problem is that all these undocumented people are coming here and they're taking up the houses that should be for Americans. And that's why the prices are so high, because there is a housing shortage. There is not a housing shortage. There is 16 million vacant homes in the United States right now. Investment firms are sitting on them. I mean, 1 in 4 houses in the first quarter of 2024 were bought by, or I'm sorry, 1 in 7 houses were bought by these big hedge funds and banks and financial institutions for the purpose of just sitting on these houses and creating artificial scarcity, artificial shortages. That's why the rent is so high. It's because rich people want to get even richer. It's not because of immigrants. And so that's part of this racist demonization, creating the atmosphere by which immigrants, and particularly undocumented immigrants, can be blamed for all of the working class's problems. And so mass deportations are being presented as a way to solve those problems. That will not happen. That will not work. You know, jobs are being destroyed. This is another lie, right? That immigrants are, you know, the reason why it's so hard to find a good job. Well, union busting is the reason why it's so hard to find a good job, because big corporations have tried to destroy worker organizations that are advocating for a decent standard of living for working people. And automation, that capitalists are deciding, well, we don't have to pay a computer a wage. We don't have to pay, you know, an AI system, you know, a retirement fund. Let's just fire our workers and replace them with new technology. Like, these are the real problems, and it's not immigrants, it's not undocumented people, but that's exactly what this mass deportation operation is trying to convey to people falsely.
Yes, everybody, blame the capitalist system and the capitalist class, not immigrants. I mean, what you just said and the facts you gave around housing are so important, Walter. 16 million vacant homes. They're vacant because the capitalists can sit on them, drive up the price of housing because of scarcity. They can take advantage of, like, hurricanes and earthquakes, like when you think about Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton that destroyed big parts of western North Carolina and other parts of North Carolina and Georgia and Florida. People can't get wind insurance, they can't get flood insurance, they can't rebuild. A lot of people just have to sell their house, and it's already ruined, and some hedge fund is going to buy it up. some equity firm, some real estate developer, and they can sit on it. It's nothing to them. They're paying pennies. They're buying the housing for a song. Meanwhile, the U.S. government spends $1 trillion. That's the real number, almost $1 trillion every year under the pretext of national defense, when it's really just a handout to the capitalist war makers, war manufacturers. It's capitalism that is the problem, not immigrants. This is classic. This is the same technique that have been used by other reactionary governments, including Hitler's government when it came into power in 1933, said it was those East Europeans and the Jews and the Roma people and gay people. That's what Hitler did, scapegoating on a massive basis rather than explaining what was the real cause of the crisis in German society at the time. Anyway, let's go to some of the foreign policy issues. I know a lot of people are thinking foreign policy. Some people, Walter, ridiculously thought that Trump, because he said, if I was president, the war in Ukraine would not have happened. I could end this in a day. I will end it in a day. A lot of people thought, oh, Trump is going to have good relations with Russia. He's friends with Putin. He's going to bring the war to an end. When you look at who's the new Secretary of Defense, it's not a peace agenda going on here. It's an extreme militarist, an extreme imperialist, an extreme Zionist. I mean, he's like a crusading Zionist, Christian evangelical Zionist. Anyway, we have a couple of clips from Pete Hegseth. I mean, people might not know of him if you don't watch Fox News because he's a Fox News host. Maybe this will be a Fox News administration. Anyway, let's start with the first clip. It's where he says Russia is just a gas station with a flag. It's like remarkable hostility towards Russia. Anyway, let's hear it.
Russia is effectively a gas station with a flag, and when you cut off their energy capabilities, you cripple them. When you increase sanctions, as the Trump administration did, you make them more vulnerable. And when you supply actual weapons instead of blankets to their adversaries, you're able to block them. I mean, remember when Barack Obama in 2012 said to Mitt Romney, the 1980s called, and they want their foreign policy back? Mm-hmm. The Democrats have exploited Russia when they think it's politically advantageous to them, Russia against Trump. But when they've been at the helm, they've allowed Vladimir Putin to expand his influence and expand what he wants to be is the restoration of the Soviet Union. That is ultimately his goal. He said it outright. Democrats have no tools in the toolbox to actually fight back.
All right, that doesn't sound like an era of rosier relations with Russia, Walter.
No, I mean, none of these picks are pacifists or pro-peace people. I mean, they're all extreme warmongers. Trump is pledged, like, I'm the only person who can prevent World War III from happening. Well, if there's going to be a World War III, it'll be because of conflict with China and with Russia, and all of these people are the most extreme anti-China and anti-Russia hawks you can imagine. Yeah, so Pete Hegseth. This very unknown figure. I mean, that's another sort of interesting, maybe side piece of this, but can this guy actually assert control over the most powerful generals on the planet, the Pentagon? But anyway, I mean, he's known. If people have heard of him, it's because of his advocacy for convicted war criminals. He's written books. He goes on the speaking circuit. He's an advocate for U.S. service members who have been convicted of heinous crimes, murder, desecration of bodies, the very few instances where the U.S. military justice system actually holds people accountable. He's outraged by that. And so he campaigned and successfully campaigned for Trump to pardon a lot of those people during his first term. You can hear it in that clip. Completely hostile to Russia, completely hostile to China, and somebody who's going to be also completely loyal to Donald Trump and do whatever he wants. But I mean, it seems like if you look, when you look at Marco Rubio in the State Department, John Ratcliffe to be the new head of the CIA, Michael Waltz to be the National Security Advisor, all of these people totally hostile to Russia, as Trump himself was during his first term in office.
All right, I have another clip from Hegseth that I want to play. This is about the man's true views on Israel. Now, a lot of people voted against Biden because the Biden-Harris administration had basically supported the genocide committed by the Netanyahu government against the people of Gaza. And it is a genocide. It's ongoing. It's expanded. Even now, Biden is saying we're going to send more bombs. This came out today. We're sending more military aid to Israel. So people naturally wanted to hold the Biden-Harris administration responsible for genocide against Palestinians. But these guys are not better, and in fact, ideologically even worse, as hard as that is to imagine. Here's something where we really see what Hegseth believes about Israel. He believes it's the complete right wing of the Zionist movement's narrative. Let's listen.
Open up your Bible. God granted Abraham this land. The 12 tribes of Israel established the constitutional monarchy 1000 BC. King David was their second king and established Jerusalem as the capital. Jews were fighting foreign occupiers for centuries, ultimately maintaining a presence there. But the key aspect, and right now, Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims are trying to erase the Jewish ties to Jerusalem as we speak.
Crazy. Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims are trying to erase the Jewish presence in Jerusalem. It's just the opposite is going on. The right-wing Israeli racist, fascist extremists are demonstrating at Al-Aqsa Mosque. They're trying to really take it over. The plan of Trump and the right-wing settlers is to annex the West Bank, to annex Gaza, as they have already done to the Golan Heights, which belong to Syria. The Israelis seized these territories in June 1967, the 1967 war. The UN says the West Bank is an illegal occupation. They say the same thing about Gaza. The same thing about Golan Heights, which was part of Syria, but has now been annexed and is part of Israel. These guys are saying, look, the Bible is a real estate deed. The Bible gives Jews, Israeli Jews, this territory. The Palestinians, by even existing, are trying to erase the biblical narrative. This is how right-wing Hegseth is.
Yeah, he's a representative of this increasingly powerful trend in U.S. right-wing politics, Christian Zionism. And right, it's essentially a theocratic presentation. It's like the Bible says this, and therefore international law and the history of the past 2,500 years, forget all of that. Throw that out the window because the Bible says that, Israel gets all of this land. Crazy, so extreme. Another way that the power of this Christian Zionist trend is being expressed in the Trump cabinet picks is Mike Huckabee being selected to be the U.S. ambassador to Israel. He's another one of these religious fanatics, believes that, their job is to basically bring about the Bible's prophecy of the return of the tribes of Israel to the promised land. I mean, it's just off the wall, unbelievable. Itmar Ben-Gvir, maybe the most extreme fascist in the Israeli government, he was on Twitter celebrating the appointment of Huckabee, and yeah, Pete Hegseth, totally the same politics.
Yeah, Huckabee said there is no such thing as the West Bank. That's what he said. He said there is no West Bank. This is Judea, Samaria. This is Israel. The Palestinians illegally occupied the land.
And that the Palestinians don't exist is what Huckabee said.
Yeah, the Palestinians don't exist. Interesting, Blinken, whose father was a leader of the Zionist movement in the 1940s after World War II, Blinken, the Secretary of State under Biden, the name of his father's organization was the American Institute on Palestine. So the Zionist relocation effort was called the American Institute on Palestine, meaning even then, the Zionist movement recognized this was Palestine, but they were planning to take it over. Later, they said Palestine never existed, that it's a fiction, that there was no Palestine. But Blinken's father, the leader of one of the leaders of the Zionist movement in the U.S., would undoubtedly not have called his organization the American Institute on Palestine if, in fact, the world didn't recognize it as Palestine, which, of course, the world did. Anyway, I have one last clip from Hegseth before we go to Marco Rubio and some of the other new Trump cabinet picks. This is him about Iran. This is what he is advocating, has been advocating for Iran. He's advocating for all-out war with Iran. Let's listen.
Sometimes you have moments, Steve, and I happen to believe that we can't kick the can down the road any longer in trying to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb. They used the killing of Soleimani as an excuse to say, we're scrapping the Iran deal. We all know they were scrapping it anyway. So what better time than now to say, we're starting the clock. You've got a week. You've got X amount of time before we start taking out your energy production facilities. We take out key infrastructure. We take out your missile sites.
All right, that's the new Secretary of Defense, if confirmed. There's a lot there. I mean, that's all BS. I mean, 100% lies, just complete fabrications. Trump was the one who destroyed the Iran nuclear arms deal, whereby Iran agreed that it would not build a nuclear bomb. Said it didn't want to anyway, but it would allow international inspectors to come into Iran, very intrusive inspections. In exchange, the Obama administration would lift economic sanctions, or some of them, on Iran so it could start to, thrive economically. Iran did that. Iran complied with the deal. International Atomic Energy inspectors came into Iran. Trump was the one, not Iran. Trump was the one who destroyed that. He came in and said it was the worst deal ever. He ripped it up and said it's over. The deal is over. And then imposed more sanctions on Iran. So here you have Hegseth saying, well, Iran got rid of the arms deal and that they used the killing of Soleimani as a pretext. Well, what was the killing of Soleimani? That too was Trump ordering the assassination of a senior Iranian military leader, Qasem Soleimani, at the moment that he arrived in the airport in Iraq, in Baghdad, for peace talks. And Trump blew him up with a U.S. drone. So it's as if everything has been turned upside down when you listen to Hegseth. Iran wanted the nuclear arms deal. They were just looking for an excuse. And then the death of Soleimani somehow provided the pretext, as if Trump wasn't the one who killed him and as if Trump wasn't the one who ripped up the deal. I mean, again, crazy.
Yeah, Iran has always been in favor of, has always been open to negotiations. That's always been their position. They want to be negotiated with as equals, treated with basic respect, the sovereignty of their country respected. But I mean, so in that clip that we were just watching, he was commenting on a news story about how Iran retaliated actually to the assassination of Soleimani by launching a number of missiles at a U.S. base in Iraq. That was an extremely measured reaction. Iran deliberately did not kill any U.S. soldiers. They sent a message. But actually, the reason why there wasn't a full-scale war between the United States and Iran at the beginning of 2020 is because Iran showed restraint. They wanted peace, and so they showed restraint.
And Trump backed down, actually.
Yeah.
So Trump kills Soleimani January 3rd, 2020, in the airport assassination with a U.S. drone. Iran says we're going to retaliate. It strikes 11 U.S. military bases located in occupied Iraq. But it's a measured response. No American soldiers are killed. Obviously, they could have killed them with heavier weapons. They obviously could show that they had the capacity to penetrate American missile defense shield. But they did it in a measured way. And Trump, Walter, was the one who did not retaliate for Iran's retaliation. Because I remember we were all on the brink of war. The Answer Coalition organized demonstrations where 70,000 people in cities around the country came out. We were all poised for what might be a major regional war with Iran. And it was Trump who backed down. Because actually, if the U.S. had gone forward and had a full-out regional war with Iran, the U.S. thousands of U.S. soldiers would have died.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And, there was Mike Pompeo was one person who was under consideration for some of these top jobs, defense secretary especially. He's, one of the architects of, the first Trump administration's extreme hostility towards Iran. They call it maximum pressure. But a lot of these decisions, the assassination of Soleimani, Pompeo is really associated with this sort of suite of policies. He was sort of pushed aside in the days following Trump's election, and he has hasn't gotten one of these top positions, a lot of people felt a sense of, I think, some people felt a sense of premature relief there. Obviously, this does not represent anything fundamentally different. Mike Pompeo, the individual, may not have gotten these appointments, but people with his views, or even more extreme because they're infused with this bizarre theocratic bent, they're the ones in these positions, like Hegseth.
Yeah, and by the way, everybody, Pompeo, when he was no longer Secretary of State after 2020, like Hunter Biden, was immediately employed as a board member for one of these Ukrainian companies that gave him huge amounts of money every month. Hunter Biden was getting, I think, $50,000 a month from the Ukrainian energy company, in an area that he had no knowledge about. But he was Joe Biden's son, obviously corrupt. Pompeo also went on the payroll of the Ukrainian company. I think it's a telecommunications company. A number of people who are there's kind of this sort of liberal, radical part of the left that kind of supported Trump because he was going to bring peace. And they're making the argument that, like, these right-wing neocon militarists, Zionists are infiltrating into the Trump administration. And Pompeo was trying to infiltrate in. And obviously, Trump decided Pompeo's a liability. He didn't want him to come in. He got people equally right-wing, but who were not working for a Ukrainian telecommunications company. But it's sort of self-deception on the part of these people to think that Trump is actually going to sort of live up to his campaign promises. And they weren't even promises. They were inferences that he would have a different, more peaceful, less neocon, less militarist road. I want to go to Marco Rubio. Yes, little Marco, as Donald used to call him in the 2016 primaries. And Rubio called him like a psychopath and a liar and all kinds of, bad things. Well, Marco Rubio is now, because he's kissed the ring for the last year or two, kissed Donald Trump's ring, he's back in the good stead of the Trump Mar-a-Lago crowd. Anyway, again, for people thinking Trump is going to be like something different from a neocon militarist imperialist, here, let's hear what Marco Rubio said about China. This is a clip. I have a few Marco Rubio clips, but this is him on China.
China has shown itself to be anything but a responsible global partner. And this is a dangerous recipe for conflict.
So you see this alliance of countries that are starting to line up underneath this Chinese world order. It won't be identical to the Cold War, but I will just say China is a much bigger threat to America than the Soviet Union ever was to America or the world.
But then, not to mention, we do have near-peer adversaries. We didn't 25 years ago. The United States lived in a unipolar world where we were the only show in town. Now there are at least one unprecedented near-peer adversary, the Chinese Communist Party.
Today's China, governed by the Chinese Communist Party, is not playing by any rules. It's a predatory state in nature, and it actively seeks to supplant not just the United States, but a world order committed to democracy, human rights, and the dignity of all.
Yeah, we must go to war with China because it wants a different world order. It doesn't play by the rules. Well, the U.S. has invaded, let's see, Korea, Vietnam, Grenada, Lebanon, Panama, Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Iraq twice, actually, bombed Libya. What are the countries that China has invaded, Walter? Obviously, I'm asking you a rhetorical question.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, China has not waged war on any country. I mean, the United States has 800 military bases all around the world. China does not. The United States spends vastly more money on its military than China and the next, I think, 6 or 7 countries combined. I mean, the idea that China is coming for the American way of life or human rights or democracy or whatever Rubio was saying in that clip is completely, absolutely absurd. But you're right. I mean, Rubio is one of the main advocates of an all-out war with China. I mean, of the drive to war with China. I mean, right now it's a Cold War, but it could become a not-so-Cold War. Rubio is actually sanctioned by the Chinese government, actually. He was sanctioned in 2020 over his incessant promotion of separatist efforts. You know, his support for different political groups that want to carve off one piece or another of China, in particular Hong Kong, supporting Hong Kong separatists. Also, he's the sponsor of, a lot of legislation regarding Taiwan. One is the Taiwan Peace Through Strength Act, which would essentially massively step up the arms sales, the arms transfers that the U.S. military conducts or U.S. corporations conduct with Taiwan. That then those weapons would include deterrent capabilities, meaning weapons that are so advanced and fearsome that would make China afraid to invade. So he's an advocate of the most escalatory policies. I mean, another side of this is the potential trade war with China that Trump will be launched or is pledged to launch. But yes, Marco Rubio, one of the worst, most disgusting imperialists in the whole U.S. political establishment.
And the senator from Florida, you have this large concentration of right-wing Venezuelan, upper-class Venezuelans, same with the Cubans, sort of the center of what were the CIA operations to overthrow the Cuban Revolution, a terrorist multi-year, multi-decade campaign. Rubio was all about Donald Trump announcing in January 2019 that Maduro was no longer the president of Venezuela, that Juan Guaido was the new president, even though most Venezuelans had not heard of Juan Guaido. Rubio was all about that. And then the U.S. tried with Guaido and others to stage multiple coup attempts and assassination attempts against Maduro. They failed. Venezuela's government has held on in spite of all odds. And Cuba has held on in spite of the fact that Trump, with the support of Rubio, had added 243 more sanctions on Cuba, coercive economic measures that Biden kept in place. Biden did not go back to Obama's policy of a semi-normalization or early normalization with Cuba. He stayed with Trump's policy. That's how right-wing the Democrats are. Anyway, if you're Cuban, if you're Venezuelan, you're looking at the Trump administration, it's got to be very worrisome. And again, I talked in the beginning, we're building and we must build a movement in solidarity with the immigrant community, with millions of immigrant families. And we're going to do that. As a matter of fact, we're going to do it day one of the Trump administration. On January 20th, thousands of people are going to Washington, D.C. for the inauguration to say stop the Trump agenda or defeat the Trump agenda. Not simply anti-Trump. That's a dead end. That's what the Democrats tried to get people to do, as if Trump is the problem, as opposed to the capitalist system with both ruling class parties being the problem. But the Trump agenda is Wall Street's agenda. As you said in the beginning, it's the billionaires' agenda. So people are going to be demonstrating not just in Washington, D.C., but literally in, I would say, scores, perhaps hundreds of cities around the United States on day one of the Trump administration, on January 20th. And they're going to say, stand with the immigrants. Money to go for people who have been destroyed by floods and hurricanes rather than endless war. But also to stand with Cuba and Venezuela. Because Marco Rubio, as Secretary of State, will pick up with the same efforts by the Trump administration to carry out regime change against these countries that have done nothing except assume and assert, demand, and fight for their own independence and sovereignty. All of these things are on the chopping block, Walter. That's why we have to fight. That's why we have to mobilize. The Democrats are saying, oh, let's get ready to have the next election in 2 years or 4 years. We can't wait. People cannot wait. Immigrant families cannot wait. Cuba cannot wait. We have to mobilize right away, and that's, in fact, what we will do. Anyway, I want to come back. We'll finish up more about this mass movement that's emerging, will emerge in the coming days and weeks. But I want to go back to another element about Rubio, where, again, people, sort of this wishful thinking people, thought maybe something's different going to happen under the Republicans because they're not following the neocon agenda of the Democrats. So Rubio actually voted against Biden's huge financial package to give money for the Ukraine war, money for Taiwan separatism, and of course money for Israel. So Rubio voted no on that. But when you actually listen to why he was voting no, very demagogically, it shows that it wasn't a move to the left at all. In fact, it was a move even to the right, which is hard to imagine given how right-wing things were. Anyway, listen to this clip.
But while this invasion of Ukraine most certainly poses a national security interest to the United States and a risk to our country, the invasion of America across our southern border is even more important. And I made it clear months ago that while I support helping Ukraine, I would only vote to do so if the president issued executive orders that would help stop this.
So basically saying, Walter, the U.S. is being invaded by these immigrants. So many of them are Venezuelans, and so many of them are Cubans. Why are they coming? They're coming because the economy of their country was destroyed. And who destroyed it? Marco Rubio, along with the others. Anyway, go ahead.
That's right. I mean, it's hard to overstate how unbelievably cruel the economic war on Venezuela and Cuba has been. Tens of thousands of people, I think up to 40,000 people is what the Center for Economic Policy and Research found. They died because of the impact of the sanctions, because essential medicine isn't allowed into the country. I mean, food isn't getting into the country. That this is true of both Venezuela and Cuba. When it comes to Cuba, the 243 additional Trump sanctions were maintained by the Biden administration, and that's caused a tremendous hardship, especially in the electrical sector. There's a very major problem in Cuba right now with massive blackouts, not because of quote unquote government incompetence or the failures of socialism, but because of the extreme unrelenting aggression of U.S. capitalism and imperialism, preventing fuel from being imported to the country, fuel to run the power generation plants, as well as spare parts needed to make essential repairs. So everything is about starving Cuba, starving Venezuela, doing it in the most cruel way possible. And then, yes, of course, a large number of people feel like they have no choice but to leave their homes and go to a place where they can find a job and some basic semblance of security, which actually is mainly other countries in Latin America, but many are also coming to the United States.
All right, I want to play one clip we have from John Ratcliffe, the new CIA director, if confirmed. Let's listen to this. Again, it says a lot about what the Trump foreign policy will actually be.
They're willing to ignore acts of war. I mean, when our own intelligence community tells us that they're hacking into the Trump campaign to help Kamala Harris win the election, when they engage in an act of war of trying to assassinate President Trump, and perhaps most importantly, when they engage in the act of war of firing through its Houthi-controlled rebels ballistic missiles at 3 U.S. warships, and there had been no actions and no consequences to those acts of war by Iran.
So another Iran war hawk, calling for basically condemning Biden for not having already been at war with Iran. That's John Ratcliffe, everybody, new CIA director.
Yeah, John Ratcliffe is absolutely one of these militarist hardline hawks. He's a Trump, political loyalist, right? I think that's why he was chosen over others. He was Trump's director of national intelligence at the end of his first term in office. He's also somebody who, by the way, was a founder of a law firm or a partner in a law firm with John Ashcroft, who is George W. Bush's attorney general, responsible for some of the most terrible violations of civil liberties in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. Sort of the prime moment of like the neocon hawks, right? These neoconservatives that we were talking about a little while ago. Ashcroft is one of those key figures. Ratcliffe, a close business associate, essentially, of him. But yeah, he's somebody who advocates for unlimited aggression against Iran and really all-out war, full-scale war. which would be, of course, absolutely devastating to the people of the region. I mean, the death and destruction that would result from that is impossible to put into words. Also, it would draw in U.S. troops almost certainly directly into the fighting. It's not going to be the children of politicians like Ratcliffe or Trump or the executives who grow rich off of these wars at Boeing and Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. They're not going to be sent to fight and kill and die in these wars. It's going to be the kids of working class families who are sent to conduct, this terrible war of aggression that Ratcliffe and these other elite politicians have planned.
Yeah, and Ashcroft, as Attorney General, not only were thousands of Muslims rounded up for no other reason than the fact that they were Muslim right after September 11th, but that's when the Justice Department had the tool of the Patriot Act passed by the U.S. Senate with only one dissenting vote, passed by both houses of Congress, in fact, and then signed into law by George W. Bush. But that allowed the U.S. intelligence services to go into public libraries in the United States and find out what books people took out. Yes, they gave the intelligence services the right to go into libraries to make sure that the books we are reading are not, quote, subversive books. And if a librarian publicly exposed that the FBI had come to the library, this was all under the Patriot Act. This actually was happening. If the librarians reported it, they would be held criminally liable under the Patriot Act for revealing that the FBI was spying on what books people were reading. This is the Ashcroft, Ratcliffe, that whole wing of the U.S. capitalist class. That's what they were all about right after September 11th. Let's talk about Trump himself and where Trump is going. I want to start first with a clip. This is about his invasion of, or maintenance of, it was under Obama that U.S. troops went to Syria. Trump kept them there. They're in sort of the northeast part of Syria under the pretext of fighting ISIS, even though the U.S. did none of the fighting against ISIS in Syria. But the U.S. military is actually where the Syrian oil fields are. Listen to what Trump said about what the U.S. plans to do or wants to do or what he wants to do with Syrian oil.
And then they say he left troops in Syria. You know what I did? I left troops to take the oil. I took the oil. The only troops I have are taking the oil. They're protecting the oil. I took over.
We're taking the oil. We're not taking the oil.
Well, maybe we will. Maybe we won't.
They're protecting the facility.
I don't know. Maybe we should take it. But we have the oil. Right now, the United States has the oil. So they say he left troops in Syria. No, I got rid of all of them other than we're protecting the oil. We have the oil.
Yeah, it's like we have the oil. Like he is so transactional, Trump is, that in the right-wing host is trying to help him is that, well, you mean protect the oil, right? And he said, well, no, I mean, we want the oil. It's our oil. We have the oil. Trump feels like unencumbered. You know, most imperialist politicians in this century and maybe in the second half of the 20th century, they didn't talk as naked imperialist colonizers, where the old colonizers would just say, yeah, of course, we took Haiti's money because we could take Haiti's money when the U.S. Marines invaded Haiti in 1915 and literally looted all of the money out of Haiti's banks and brought it to New York City, to Citibank. Nowadays, most imperialists say, you know, we're fighting for freedom, we're stopping weapons of mass destruction, we're protecting civilians. Some noble cause goes with these imperialist invasions, not Trump. He's like, no, we have the oil. That's what makes it good.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I think the reason why that type of talk and presentation makes other members of the ruling elite nervous, like that Fox News host was saying, no, you mean protecting the oil, right? Because that type of just naked imperialist bullying, threatening, that language engenders mass opposition. It will engender mass opposition all around the world to the U.S. empire at many different levels, and also within the United States as well. I mean, you were talking just a few minutes ago about the mass demonstrations that are going to take place in Washington, D.C. and all across the country on January 20th to mark Trump's inauguration. I mean, I think that people are, of course, disgusted at the, that type of talk, right? You know, pillaging, using U.S. troops to pillage the resources of other countries, but also Another sort of taboo that Trump is breaking is making the capitalists themselves in charge of the government. Typically, the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, they prefer to have this sort of layer of politicians, professional politicians, administer the levers of government so that they essentially take the heat for the failures of the system. And it's not, the big businessmen themselves. But Trump himself is a billionaire. He's putting Elon Musk in charge of everything, but this Department of Government Efficiency, reshaping the federal government. Musk's partner in that will be Vivek Ramaswamy, another one of these, ultra wealthy CEOs, capitalists. The two people running his transition effort, Howard Lutnick and Linda McMahon, they're both multimillionaire, billionaire CEOs. Lutnick is a finance capitalist. So this is actually really dangerous because it's so naked. It's obviously the capitalist class, the billionaires directly in charge of the government, exercising their dictatorship over everybody else. And they're not trying to hide it in the way that they talk even.
Yeah, Musk is going to head up the Department of Government Efficiency, which he's calling DOG, Department of Government Efficiency. This is a newly created thing by Trump. But what is it really? It's to basically fire thousands of federal workers. It's basically to fire thousands of other public sector workers. It's going to organize a purge of regulations. Well, what kind of regulations? Regulations are considered like equal to bureaucracy, red tape, something bad. Well, the regulations they want to get rid of are the regulations that require corporations not to poison the air and poison the water, which they routinely did before many of these regulations were put into place in the 1960s and 70s. So they're getting rid of workers and they're getting rid of environmental regulations. And why? Because it's all about the billionaires. And why are they punching or using immigrants as a punching bag? Because they don't want the rest of the working class to rise up against the billionaires. Keep hating immigrants. Keep hating Latinos. Keep hating Asian Americans or Africans or people coming from other parts of the world. Hate them. Or maybe hate a politician like you're saying, Walter, but don't hate the capitalists. So the capitalists provide the shield. This is a propaganda shield. This is a billionaire's agenda. And I think that the billionaires were very, very upset when the civil rights revolution that more or less begins in 1955, as we've talked about a lot on this show, but I don't mind repeating it because people have to actually remember this history. The civil rights revolution in America that starts in earnest with Rosa Parks giving up her seat and the triggering of the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, which went on for a year, that changed the nature of the United States. There was a cultural revolution in the United States. There was a period of expansion of democracy. There was an expansion of people feeling power, their own power, a period of empowerment. Black America, but also young Latinos, young Asian Americans, women, gay people. I mean, the Stonewall Rebellion in 1969 and what was then called the Gay Liberation Movement, meaning, the movement that eventually struggles for marriage equality. In other words, the movement against bigotry and oppression, the movement that is against all of the manifestations of different kinds of oppression under the capitalist system, that is something the capitalists never wanted to have happen. And Trump and the Trump program and MAGA, Make America Great Again. Well, when do they think it was great? They think it was great before this massive movement or movements changed the face of America. They can't directly, or so far haven't directly confronted Black America because it's too strong and the tradition of resistance and struggle too great, that they're sort of focused on other sectors of society that they consider to be less, let's say more vulnerable. Immigrants, transgendered community or transgendered kids, Like, other people are the targets, but that's not the real target. The real target is to roll back the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, to roll back, make America bad again, or, worse again. MAWA, make America worse again by getting rid of these social and economic and political reforms that were wrested from the ruling class on the basis of mass struggle.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, another frequent guest on this show, Eugene Perrier, talks about like a detonator effect that the Black liberation struggle has had all throughout U.S. history, where the struggle of Black America for freedom against white supremacy detonates all these other struggles for justice among different oppressed groups. We saw that in 2020 in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. I mean, the largest protests in U.S. history. Certainly the largest against Trump, but the largest protest in U.S. history. Over 20 million people participated in that. That was a broad-based challenge to the oppression of Black people, to white supremacy, and clearly that shook the capitalist system to its core as well. So yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that historical analysis, and that is their main project, the project of the people who have coalesced around the Trump administration. Elon Musk is a key organizer of this. Peter Thiel, another one of these, far-right fascistic billionaires. But really, a broader section too. I mean, those are maybe some of the most extreme examples. But the people around the Heritage Foundation, which put out the Project 2025 agenda. These concessions to the Black liberation movement, or earlier in the 1930s to the labor movement, they were understood as what they were, concessions by the ruling class, right? I mean, these were necessary steps back that they took to essentially forestall a revolution, to maintain their fundamental control over the government and the economy. And they want to take that back as soon as they possibly can. I mean, we see this every time a union contract is up for negotiation, right? If the union was able to win something the last time the contract was negotiated, the bosses are going to do everything they can to try to take that back if they're in a position to the next time there's a renegotiation. And so, the Trump billionaire cabinet is essentially saying it's time for a renegotiation of all social and economic and political rights in the United States, and we're taking back what you won, or we're going to attempt to, and that's what the crux of the coming struggle is going to be about.
Yeah, I want to play one more clip. This is Donald Trump basically starting to lift the lid a little bit on one of the real goals, which is a big assault on the gains achieved by Black America, but gains that were victories for all people who are oppressed, including women of all races and nationalities. Trump is basically calling for reparations for white people, as I mentioned earlier. I want to play this clip. It really says a lot about what Trump's plans are.
Furthermore, I will direct the Department of Justice to pursue federal civil rights cases against schools that continue to engage in racial discrimination and schools that persist in explicit, unlawful discrimination under the guise of equity will not only have their endowments taxed, but through budget reconciliation, I will advance a measure to have them fined up to the entire amount of their endowment. A portion of the seized funds will then be used as restitution for victims of these illegal and unjust policies.
Restitution, Walter, that's another word for reparations. So, like, destroy a college university, fine them for their entire endowment. So let's say a university has $500 million endowment, a fine of $500 million. You take the $500 million from the university. Their crime is that they were involved in equity programs or some kind of affirmative action to overcome the centuries of racial discrimination and affirmative action that was provided for rich white men. To even the score a little bit, to change the playing field a little bit. For that, they would be penalized, lose their entire endowment, and then the funds would be used as restitution, another word for reparations, for the victims of racial discrimination. And who are they? Well, that would be white men. Again, this is like the program of the defeated slaveocracy in the Civil War. This is the program of the architects of the Confederacy, the architects of Jim Crow, the architects of the apartheid system that legally ran this country until the Civil Rights Act in 1964 said it wasn't legal. Make America worse again. This is what Trump really wants to do. It's a racist, misogynist, billionaires agenda. And Walter, and I'm going to give you the last word on this, we have to come together. People have to mobilize. They have to organize. They are going to organize. January 20th is day one. As I said before, thousands of people will be in Washington, D.C., but they're also going to be in Atlanta, in Salt Lake City, in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, in big cities, mid-sized cities, and in small towns. People saying no to the Trump agenda, defeat the billionaires' agenda, and also to say yes, we are in solidarity with the people of Palestine, with those who are the victims of genocide. Yes, we are in solidarity with the people in Cuba and Venezuela. Make no mistake about it. We think that the people in Palestine and the people in Cuba and the people in Venezuela are our sisters and brothers, part of the same human family. And they're the victims of the same system of capitalism that oppresses working class and poor people in the United States. In that sense, we have more in common with them than we do with the oppressors who say that they are American patriots, who wrap themselves in the American flag, but perpetuate all kinds of crimes of all types against working class and oppressed people around the world. So that's the challenge, Walter. It's like, don't look to the Democrats. The Democrats facilitated the advent or the resurgence of the right by being so right-wing themselves. They try to steal the thunder of the right by being the right. But as Kurt Vonnegut said, you are what you pretend to be. If you pretend to be ultra-right, you are ultra-right. And the Democrats don't have to pretend to be militarists and imperialists because on that score, they're 100%. They're not pretending. They were never pretending. Anyway, it's up to us. It's up to the people. It's up to people's organizations. The question is, can we do it? And I think we can do it. We have to rise to the occasion. This is serious business. So much is at stake, but we can fight. And if we fight, we can win. If we don't fight, if we don't mobilize, we lose. And so really, I would say there's no option but to organize. Go ahead. You get the last word.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. I mean, it can be daunting to look at who Trump is putting in his cabinet, the scale of the attack that's coming. But we can win. It is possible to win if we keep a couple key lessons in mind. And I think the most important one is that the basis for a successful winning struggle against the Trump agenda, the Trump far-right agenda, is a vision for an entirely new system. If we are out in the streets opposing Trump essentially as a defense of the status quo, which is what the Democratic Party and Democratic Party politicians want us to do, that will never attract the sufficient level of support that we need, the sufficient mass we need to actually defeat these people. But if we're going out there and saying we have our own vision for what society can be like, where everybody's basic needs are guaranteed, where the planet is preserved, where we have peace instead of war, where there's equality for all and everyone's basic fundamental right to exist is respected, that is something that can galvanize enough people, unite enough people across lines, even across the line of like, who did you vote for in the last election, and say on the basis of our support for this new type of just society, we're going to stop the billionaires in the Trump administration, and we're going to reject all of the misleadership and misdirection of the Democratic Party. We're not going to become a tail to their kite. We'll take to the streets and fight for our own interests.
Right. So very well said, Walter. And at that meeting we had at the People's Forum on Friday night, where we had great speakers from different movements, we said, what is the question that was posed? The forum was, what is to be done, which is build a mass movement to resist and fight back and for a better world, a different world, and not for the status quo. And we said also what is not to be done, which is don't do as happened in 2016, where this very promising movement simply became a tail to the kite of the Democratic Party. The Democrats are not the solution. We are the solution. The movement is the solution. We can have a radical transformation in the world. It's all achievable. It doesn't have to be this way. This is not mandated by God. This is not the kings and queens of medieval Europe told people, this is God's will. Well, no, it's not. This is capitalism, and if we mobilize and organize, we can stop it. Walter, I said you got the last word, but actually I took the last word. Walter Smolarek, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.